Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're going to be walking through an alternative approach to using the Tableau Bridge. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you know what Tableau Cloud and the Tableau Bridge already are, so we can go ahead and jump into what does this notebook do. This Google Colab notebook or Jupyter notebook is going to do three things. It's going to first connect to a SQL database and populate a Pandas data frame. Second, it's going to create a hyperfile from that data frame. And then last, it's going to publish that hyperfile to Tableau Cloud. What does this notebook not do? It's not going to establish a live connection to private data. It's only going to create an extract. It's going to use Snowflake as the database, but you could use a generic database and you could just kind of use this as like a template. Also, we're going to use the Tableau REST API single upload command as opposed to the multi-part upload. I think the cutoff limit is like 60 megabytes. So our example is going to fall below that. And then last, this is not going to be scheduled, this specific notebook, but we can talk about how you can go about scheduling that. With that, we can go ahead and jump in. So we'll start this off by installing two important packages. First one is going to be the Snowflake connector for Python. If you aren't using Snowflake, you can install a different Python package, or PyODBC is like a generic package. I haven't personally messed around with that too much, but I think you can also connect to Snowflake using that. The second package, while we wait for it to install, is Pantab. Pantab is awesomely convenient. It's a wrapper for Tableau's Hyper API. Specifically to take Pandas data frames and quickly create hyper extracts with them. One thing that we're going to be doing right after these finish installing is we're going to have to actually restart the runtime, which we can do with this one Python line. And not exactly sure why we need to restart the runtime, but for Pantab we do. We didn't have to with the Snowflake package, but this line, restart the runtime, you can also do that by going to runtime and hitting restart. And if you were, this is just to get the package working properly. If you were scheduling this, you would just have the packages installed in your virtual environment and ready to go. Okay, so now that we've done our pre-work, we can go ahead and connect to our Snowflake database. So the first step will be inputting our Snowflake credentials. And I will enter them like this so that you, my dear viewer, don't see the credentials. Okay, hopefully I entered those correctly, and we can go ahead and establish our connection. Now we can specify our warehouse, and we got our cursor, so I think I entered correctly, and we're using our compute warehouse, just like a default, I think. And now we are going to populate our data frame using the SQL query. So this query is just grabbing a sample Snowflake table that comes installed with like Snowflake trial, and we're just going to grab 100 rows for this example. Alrighty, and we can preview our results. We can see, looks like our table came in properly. So I have like these two date columns right here, and I do know that Pandas sometimes doesn't really treat our date columns the same way as we want SQL to treat our date columns. So I'm going to cast those two columns as date times, because that can cause issues down the road. Awesome. So now that we have our data frame ready to go, we can move on to part two, which is creating our hyper file using that data frame. And section two is like literally this like one line frame to hyper. It's going to take in as input our test df, and it's going to write this hyper file, example.hyper. And if I go to my files here and refresh, we can see example.hyper is now in my files here. All right, we'll go back to that later. So section 3, we're going to publish our hyper file to Tableau Cloud using the REST API. Our first step is to authenticate into the REST API, which I'm going to do using a personal access token. So I'm going to go to my other screen to grab my access token. And the way you get these access tokens are through the Tableau Cloud site, like in settings somewhere. Okay, so we created a Python variable called pat, which is our personal access token. And now we're going to use pat within our Python or our HTTPS request using the Python request library to authenticate us into the REST API. Awesome. Now that we're hopefully successfully authenticated into the REST API, we can just double check that it worked by, whoops, this is text, I meant to do code. We can double check just by seeing if we get a 200 response code. Yes, we did. Cool, delete these. Now we can go ahead and get our credentials token, which will be required. We'll need to put that in the header of all our subsequent requests to the REST API. And we'll also grab our site ID. So I'm just gonna, this is probably a better way to do this, but I'm gonna use Beautiful Soup just to parse out the XML to grab these two things, the credentials token and the site ID. I'm not gonna print those out because those are private, but we went ahead and stored those as variables. And now I'm gonna use that site ID and credentials token. You can see I'm passing in credentials token here, site ID here, to retrieve the project ID, which is going to be where I publish this hyper file to. Awesome. Again, we're going to use Beautiful Soup to parse out. I don't need to import it twice, so I can go ahead and comment that out, to parse out our project ID. Awesome. And now, before we actually go ahead and make our final request to publish this, we are going to create this XML file, which is going to be metadata that is required to publish our hyperfile. So this metadata is going to say data source name, description, project ID. So you can go ahead and first we're just going to make a Python variable called XML string, and then we're actually going to use Python to write a file. And again, if I go here, you can see that we just created this publish data source XML file. Awesome. Okay. Now that we have that, our last step is to publish the hyperfile to the specified project. And I'm going to switch it up and use curl for this last request as opposed to the Python request library. There's no good reason for that other than I just couldn't get the Python request to work, but I got the curl request to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Python variable with just a large string that is my curl request effectively. I'm going to take this Python variable and create a bash variable called curl request. And then we're going to actually go ahead and send that curl request, which will publish up our hyperfile. Awesome. So let's look at this return. Scroll, scroll, scroll. And we can actually see at the end the web page URL for our hyperfile. So we can go ahead and click this. It's going to take us to this data source. It's called data source 1. And you can see from here our columns came in. You can create a new workbook off of this data source. And we can go ahead and start, bringing out to see that we have our workbook. So I don't even know what these fields are, but bottom line is we got our our data source successfully published. And going back to the notebook really quick, bonus section number 4. So this is just a Jupyter notebook in Collab, but this is really for you, the viewer, to take as a template and operationalize the notebook by scheduling it, or maybe even making it into an interactive application where end users can go in and add tables or queries or views that they want, extracts that get refreshed and published to Tableau Cloud with. Here are a few like scheduler options. I know I actually haven't really tested this out, but you can download a Jupyter notebook as the IPython notebook or that file type, and then use it in some of these scheduling tools. So I hope this was useful. Please definitely let me know kind of what questions that you might have from this. I'm going to put this out there and you can copy it, but I probably won't like support this or update it with as new packages come out. So this is really just meant to be inspiration and a template. And again, hope this was useful, and see you next time.